town of Eldridge Hollow, nestled deep in the forest and shrouded in mist, the arrival of the blood moon brought with it an air of unease. The townsfolk, with haunted eyes and whispered voices, spoke of an ancient legend, a malevolent entity that demanded a life every year during the blood moon. They claimed the entity, known as the Harbinger, resided in the woods, and each sacrifice was a grim necessity to ensure the town's safety. As the blood moon approached, an unsettling anticipation spread through the town, like the feeling of an impending storm. Children played in the streets, unaware of the dark ritual that awaited them. But for the adults, the weight of tradition hung heavy, a chilling reminder of the price they had to pay. The town gathered in the square, an ancient stone altar at the center, covered in moss and etched with faded runes. As night fell, a sense of dread crept in. The mayor, an old man with sunken cheeks and trembling hands, stood before the townsfolk, his voice quavering as he read from an old, worn book. Every blood moon, we must appease the Harbinger. We must offer a life to ensure our survival. The townspeople murmured in agreement, their faces pale and grim. Each year, the lottery was held to select the sacrifice, and this year was no different. A small wooden box was passed around, filled with slips of paper. Each name was a potential death sentence, a reminder of the darkness that loomed over them. Among the crowd stood Emily, a spirited young woman with fiery red hair and a fierce determination to escape the town's horrific traditions. As the box neared her, she felt her heart race. She knew the odds were against her, but she refused to succumb to fear. One by one, names were drawn, and the atmosphere grew heavier with each announcement. The townsfolk's expressions turned from anxious hope to despair as friends and neighbors were called forth to the altar. When the mayor finally reached for the last slip, silence enveloped the square. "Emily Carter," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the still night. Emily's heart sank. She stepped forward, numb with shock, as the townsfolk's eyes turned to her, a mix of pity and fear. The mayor beckoned her to the altar, where a ceremonial dagger lay glimmering ominously under the light of the blood moon. "Tonight, we honor our pact with the Harbinger," he intoned, as the townspeople encircled her, chanting in an ancient language. Shadows danced around them, and Emily could feel the air grow cold. The moon bathed everything in a crimson glow, casting long, dark shadows. Desperation surged within her. As the chants grew louder, she broke free from the circle, running towards the woods. The townsfolk gasped, but the mayor's voice cut through the air. "Stop her! She must not escape." Emily sprinted into the woods, branches tearing at her clothes and the underbrush crackling beneath her feet. Behind her, she could hear the frantic footsteps of the townsfolk closing in, their chants morphing into frantic cries. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, creating a labyrinth of shadows that twisted around her. As she ran, whispers filled the air, echoing through the trees. "Join us, Emily." The voice was seductive yet chilling, like the rustling of dead leaves. Emily stumbled into a clearing and stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. There, at the center, stood an ancient stone altar, eerily similar to the one in the town square. The air was thick with an unearthly presence, and the ground trembled beneath her feet. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that burned like embers. The Harbinger, a grotesque amalgamation of shadow and form, loomed over her, its voice a low, echoing growl. "You seek to defy the pact, child?" Emily's heart raced. "I won't let you take me. I refuse to be a sacrifice." The Harbinger's laugh was a chilling sound, reverberating through the clearing. "You think you can break a bond forged in blood? The townsfolk have fed my hunger for generations. You are merely a piece in their game." As the creature spoke, the ground around her began to shift, revealing skeletal hands reaching from the earth, grasping at her ankles. Panic surged through her as she fought against the pull of the grave. Drawing on her inner strength, Emily yelled, "I won't be your pawn." Summoning every ounce of courage, she grasped a nearby rock and hurled it at the Harbinger. The creature shrieked, the sound echoing through the woods, and the grip of the skeletal hands weakened. With newfound resolve, Emily turned to flee deeper into the woods. She could hear the Harbinger's enraged cries behind her, but she kept running, branches whipping against her skin, the forest closing in around her. As she neared the edge of a cliff, the moonlight shone brightly on the precipice. Below, a dark abyss yawned, promising freedom, but also despair. She could hear the townsfolk approaching, their chants rising once more, echoing the Harbinger's wrath. "You cannot escape your fate." The Harbinger's voice boomed, sending tremors through the ground. With no other option, Emily turned to face the creature, her heart pounding. "You will not take me. I refuse to be part of your cycle of death." In that moment, the Harbinger lunged at her, and she felt the air shift as shadows swirled around them. Summoning all her strength, Emily took a step back and leapt off the cliff, plunging into the darkness below. As she fell, Emily felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. The whispers of the townsfolk and the Harbinger faded into the background, and she surrendered herself to the void. But as she fell, she sensed the presence of the spirits trapped within the Harbinger's grasp, reaching out for her, their desperate cries echoing in her mind. Suddenly, she found herself enveloped in darkness, yet it was different. Warmth replaced the coldness of the shadows. The spirits around her began to lift her up, a collective energy pushing her back toward the surface. Emily opened her eyes, gasping for air, finding herself lying on the forest floor, surrounded by the townsfolk. They looked down at her in shock. The chanting ceased, and the blood moon hung overhead, illuminating the scene. The Harbinger shrieked in rage, its form shifting violently as it lost its grip on Emily. With a final, defiant scream, the entity vanished into the night, leaving behind a chilling silence. The townsfolk stood in stunned silence, the weight of their tradition crashing down upon them. Emily rose, trembling but alive. "You can end this. No more sacrifices. You must break the pact." As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, casting a golden light on Eldritch Hollow. One by one, the townsfolk dropped to their knees, finally understanding the horror of their actions. In the days that followed, the town of Eldritch Hollow began to heal. They buried the remains of the past and swore to break the cycle of sacrifice. Emily became a symbol of courage, leading the townsfolk in rituals of remembrance, honoring the lives lost without further bloodshed. Though the blood moon would rise again, its light would no longer signify fear. Instead, it became a symbol of hope, a reminder that they had the power to forge their own destinies